Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we cover the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion, and today I am joined by the panel, Chief Bob Horton and Chief Jeff Buchanan. This week we are picking up where we left off with Captain Jason Friedman sharing the story about his deployment to Israel just 1 week after the October 8th attacks. If you haven't already, listen to last week's episode to hear part 1.
Jason, you're on this flight about 12 hours, I think you said, and you're landing just outside Tel Aviv. Your mind's racing with what is going on. What's gone on since you've been on the plane? I imagine you land and convene with a number of other volunteers in the program. You interface with the Israeli fire teams and you go to work. Could you walk us through that transition? Was it what you imagined? You're getting all the senses when you're there, and I'm not asking you to describe it in detail, but walk our audience through, the assignment and what you did. You were trained in helping them fight fires. Were you in firefighting? It sounds like maybe some rescue type work. If you're comfortable, please share a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we arrived in Tel Aviv, it took us a little while to get out of customs. A couple of the guys from LA City, they lost their baggage, or the baggage was taken off the plane because of extra weight on the plane. So they removed a couple of their bags. So a couple of the guys were stuck for like 24, 48 hours without any clothes, but they made do. They were given a whole bunch of uniforms in the meantime. So it took us a while to get out of Ben Gurion, and it was late afternoon, early evening when we arrived. So our first stop was at the fire training facility, which is their national fire training facility, which is also their fire headquarters. So we had gone there. They kind of gave us a little bit of an overview of, especially first and foremost, where the shelters were, in the event that a missile attack was to occur or any missile alarms had to go off, where the shelters were, how much time you had to get to the shelters. And almost as a welcome to Israel, the first missile alert goes off. So, immediately we're running into a shelter. We have a minute and 15 seconds in that area. As you get closer to Gaza, the time dwindles down to, I think, around 30 seconds that you have in order to get to a shelter. If you're not in a shelter, then you try to find as much of an open space as possible. You hit the ground, put your hands over your head, and maybe do a little prayer. But you got quickly adjusted to it. It didn't take long, obviously. Like I said, we were there less than an hour and we were already in the shelter. Thereafter, I was walking around. We stayed the night, and I happened to be walking around with one of the other guys, just touring the area, the campus itself, just seeing, what they have to offer. We had dinner, and then we found ourselves in the command center at the fire headquarters. Inadvertently. And, we have to, I'm thinking to myself, this is like restricted area. Like, probably no one has like weapons drawn on us because, they're probably looking at us going, who are these two? But they welcomed us in. They knew who we were. They welcomed us, the two of us in. We spent the next, I think, like 2.5 hours down the command center talking to these commanders, head honchos of the fire service, bringing us coffee, bringing us cake, and just telling stories, just talking about, the fire service, talking about the incident. During that time, another missile attack goes off. And I jokingly said to one of the other guy that was with me, I said, wow, I probably shouldn't tell my wife, about the missile attacks. And he's like, yeah, he goes, don't mention it. And our wives happen to be on a separate group chat. And they all started this when we left. About like a minute or two later, I get a text from my wife. And of course, this is, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock our time. So it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My wife texts, oh, that was a close one. And I texted her back. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, the missile that was really close to your location. Well, unbeknownst to me, she went and downloaded the app that we all had that would alert you to the missiles depending on where your location was. So I'm sitting there going, well, how did she know exactly where I was? Because I didn't tell her specifics as far as, so I hadn't talked to her since I landed. Well, she put an air tag in my luggage. And so she was like tracking me. So it was like, oh my God, this is like some like spy stuff. I'm like, my wife is like totally, got all eyes on me. So she knows where I am at all times. So I thought it was comical, but I also put myself in her shoes that, she really wanted to have a good idea if God forbid something was to happen, where exactly I was, whether, from missile attack or God forbid I was taken hostage, whatever it be. She wanted to have all eyes on me. And I thank her for that. That was kind of cool. A little annoying at times when, she would tell me, "Oh, that was a close one. There was a couple more that just came." But the next day we ended up getting deployed to our stations. So I was sent with two others to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is divided up into an east and west section. So there's two main firehouses, one on the east, one on the west. Each of them have two substations. So I was in the main station on the east, which is in a predominantly ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic area. There's 3 engines that are assigned to that firehouse. The staffing is typically per shift, somewhere around 10, sometimes 12, where you have 2 commanding officers and usually minimum 2 on each engine. Sometimes when there's enough staffing, they put 3 on the engine. So each of us had taken an engine. So we were either the third, or sometimes we were fortunate to have, be the fourth on the engine. So that was Friday. So Saturday, we arrived at the station and basically got acclimated to the station, to the apparatus. We went through our own little checkouts just to see, how they're equipped. And we had a pretty good understanding because they did teach us a little bit something that earlier that morning. And the commanding officer said, listen, when do you want to start? And so it was agreed upon, the 3 of us, that, let's just kind of decompress a little bit, kind of soak in everything, and we'll start in the morning on the shift change. And we did that, and we ended up working the next straight 10 days, 24 hours straight. Didn't take a break other than 2 days. One of the commanders had taken us out for a couple hours just to get out of the station and did a little, sightseeing, or took us to the old city, took us to some Horton areas. We saw Netanyahu's compound, or his residence, President Herzog, his residence, the Knesset, old city, just some really cool areas just to kind of get a view of Jerusalem and the surrounding area. But for 10 days straight, we went to work. It was all fire related. Their EMS and fire is separate, unlike here in Fort Lauderdale, where it's dual. We have dual response and operations and EMS together. There, it's completely separate. So we're running strictly fire related calls, which was nice. As much as I do love EMS, I'm not one of those that poo-poo on EMS. I actually, I started off as a medic, so I really do hold EMS dear to me. But it was kind of cool just to run fire calls. The station is typically a very busy station. It averages anywhere between 15 and 20 calls a day. It was down to maybe 5 or 6 calls a day. So we weren't running as much. So there was a good amount of downtime, but we used it to our advantage as far as making sure we're getting enough rest. We did some training with the shift personnel, talked about all these different stories, and whether they're the way that we operate in the United States as far as tactics, or even just personal stories, and especially listening to each of their stories. And all of them had a story. All of them had some sort of personal connection to the current status of the war. They all come from military backgrounds, because everybody has to go through the military for at least 3 years. And a lot of these, I say kids because they're like 20, 30 years younger than me, all have ties to the military somehow. So a lot of the people that I spoke to had lost friends that were military, whether it was active military, or they're part of security forces for the kibbutz, or were actually part of the concert, or they had gone to the concert. Some of them were killed, some of them hurt, and some were actually were taken. So you heard these in-depth stories, and it just amazing to hear these stories from these people, because they're very strong-willed and very well composed. These people have gone through actual situations that are extremely personal, and yet can convey a message without showing emotion. And some might think that's cold, that might be callous, or they're accustomed to it. They're very strong people. And I remember asking one of them after I gave him a hug, after telling me that two of his good friends were killed. One was an Israeli Navy SEAL who's extremely close with him. I gave him a hug and I'm like, I can't believe how well composed you are, how strong you are. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, he goes, what else are we going to be? He's like, there's not a choice. It's either you cower or you fight and you stand up. Internally, they're extremely sweet, compassionate, loving people. Just it's like I kept saying over there, and even here, and telling everybody, it's the same clowns, just different circus. It's the exact same thing as far as the fire service and the way we treat each other in the fire service, and the love and compassion, and that the way the brotherhood and sisterhood really should be. That was exemplified when I was over in Israel.
Yeah, I got one more, Jason. Are you concerned whatsoever about the IDF recruiting your wife for surveillance or reconnaissance? My gosh, I mean, she was all over it. I love it.
I don't think they'd handle her. I really don't. Listen, if I can give a plug to my wife, I'm going to do it. My wife is an amazing person. And again, I'm not saying this because I feel like pressured in order that I have to. My wife isn't Jewish. She's Catholic, and our 4 children have been baptized and are raised Catholic. Like I said before, I have a very strong spiritual foundation or belief, and she does too. And when I was away, the first Shabbat that occurred, she went and lit a Shabbos candle, which we've never done in my house. But for the mere fact that of what was going on as a tribute to the war, as a tribute to me, and also a tribute to my family and the support that they have for me, she wanted to do her part.
A couple of questions. One's just sort of a practical question, and then one probably an emotional one. Practical are things. I mean, I got to imagine. When you were talking about folks with paramedic or EMS experience going to Israel to practice, I mean, are you using medications or things that are native to their area? I mean, it's going to be written in Hebrew, or even road signs or pump calculations.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. They taught us how to use their pumps. And actually, their fire tactics are very, I shouldn't say simplified, but they are, from my perspective, they are simplified. And that's because of the amount of personnel that they have on their engines. When you're running with 2 people on the engine, you have to kind of simplify things, because if you didn't, it would take an exorbitant amount of personnel to run an operation. So their pumping operations, I learned in a matter of like a half hour. It was very simple. Even though things were, metric, things were in bars, which I have no knowledge of as far as conversion and so forth, but I saw them dial it up to a certain area, and it's like, like reality is in the fire service, you need more pressure, you need to decrease it. That's pretty, that's how you communicate.
And for the audience who couldn't see you, it was a thumbs up for increased pressure, thumbs down for decrease. That's simple. That's universal, regardless of language. Got it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's signs, a lot of the road signs are in Hebrew, but there are some that are in English as well. The majority of people know some English. Some were very fluent in it. Some had minimal, but you know what? We were able to communicate regardless. Like I said, the same clowns, different circus. But the medical side of it, I'm not really sure as far as like dosages and stuff. But yet I do know from talking to a couple of people that the medications for the most part are very similar. However, the majority of incidents that you would be running medical wise are going to be traumatic. So I can only imagine that the majority of the medications are going to be pain management. Obviously, it could be anything. But I think that the majority of the medications that they use are pretty in line with what's found in the U.S. and in other parts of Europe.
I appreciate you explaining that. You shared some real emotional connection throughout this experience, which certainly is not lost on us. It's certainly not lost on the audience. The emotional calling to be part of this, particularly this event, on the heels of the training you had done prior to support Israel, it was 2017, 2018. The medical event, cetera. For those of us that got into the fire service, were you married before you became a firefighter, or you were a firefighter and then you met your wife?
I started out my career as a volunteer fireman in New York, then got involved in EMS, spent 10 years in New York City EMS before coming down to Florida. I actually met my wife right before I got hired with Fort Lauderdale. Our first date was actually the same week that I started with Fort Lauderdale. So I know the anniversary of our first date because it's time when I started.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart. You got that locked in on it.
Exactly.
And I asked that, I pose it that way because, we all kind of get a sense of what is expected of us in this profession and what we want to be part of serving our community. After all, that's what we've trained for. And when these big emergencies happen, there's a sense of duty to be part of that. And that's something we get in the fire service, but our family doesn't always necessarily co-sign onto what that experience is going to be like. And sometimes we lose sight of that, I think, as responders, to your point of, I said yes and then realized I forgot to engage the family in this part of the discussion. And we all would have done that exact same thing, because that we don't have time to think about responding. When the emergency comes, we go, and then we realize the things we probably could have given thought to. That's just how we're wired. And but you recognize that in your family was in your heart, in your mind, in this communication that you shared with us to bring some brevity to the situation that you were in. You are demobilizing, and you're going back home, and you reconnect with your family. And now I'm thinking about putting myself in that situation to the extent I can, because not very few of us will answer a calling 12 hours away and in a different country during a wartime to do what you have done. I mean, your courage is to be commended, as Chief Buchanan said earlier. I'm now thinking about this 12 hours back, and you're going to, re-engage with your family and your kids and go through the experience. And you already shared with us very openly, where your wife's feeling a sense of duty as well. I want to be part of this experience with you, because it's not just because everything you went through and what you've shared with us today. What did you need, particularly your youngest child, to hear when you got home? What was this lesson of being a good human, of being part of this life? I'm choked up as I'm asking you this question.
It's how do I explain this? There's two different ways of looking at it. One is the protecting, the normal protective mode that we go into when we go home from work. Try not to bring our work into our home life. And this could be a whole nother podcast, which obviously we don't have time to do. But I have gone through trials and tribulations over the past 25 years of dealing with mental health issues, including PTSD, not just from 9/11, but other incidents. And it nearly cost me not only my life, but it also nearly cost me my marriage and my relationship with my children. And I could talk about this as a matter of fact, because I had gone through treatment at a facility, and that place saved my life. So now I think about things completely different than I had in the years past. So now, being in that kind of protective mode for my family, coming home was more about just being normal, just having a normal conversation. I think night was we have season tickets to the Florida Panthers. Sorry, we beat the Seattle Kraken, for those of you Kraken fans out there. But it was the first home game that I was going to. I missed the first two openers, and just being with my family for the game was all I needed, just to be with them. Didn't have to have the conversation about what it was like. I told them some things as far as what I did, more the types of calls or the equipment, or some of the sites that I saw, as far as the old city and where Christ was resurrected and so forth. To have that, a little bit of an interest in some of the things that I saw. I stayed clear of the stories that were told to me. I stayed clear of the missile attacks. I stayed clear of the disaster areas that I was exposed to down in Sderot and Ashdod, because it didn't need to be spoken about. I was here, I was home. Obviously, nothing bad happened to me. So why relive something or talk about something that ended up not being, and focus more on, just I'm home, everything's good, and I want to enjoy my time with my kids. Again, you guys are getting me choked up here, because that's really, at the end of the day, it's what's important. It's our family. The same reason why I go over there, the same reason why I go to work every day. Here in the department, it's a family. It's a second family. My priority is my first family at home. My second priority is my second family, and that includes now my family over in Israel, as would be any other place that needed my assistance. And again, it's not about being Jewish. It's not about any political agenda or religious agenda. It's just that, listen, we all got into this business because we want to help people. There's not one person, and I'll call BS on them, that gets into this business for a paycheck. Because if you did, you're going to have a short-lived career or a horrible career. We all got into this for a reason, and that's each of our truths. But I know for my truth, it's because I truly enjoy being part of something that's bigger than me, and being part of something that contributes to the welfare of another human being. And that's it. And again, so I could be anywheres, and I would be happier than a pig and poo, just giving my assistance to somebody and offering that help. One of our battalion chiefs said it the best. We're in the business of providing help. When people call 911, they're expecting help, and that's our job. We go and provide the help, and that's what makes us feel that we're accomplishing something in our life. That's our purpose.
I don't know of a better way to end, Jason. I appreciate that. And sometimes we lose this perspective, myself included, and it takes experiences like yours and what you've done to bring us back to what's really important in life. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to share that story.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for your willingness to share those stories and those details with us and our listeners. Thank you, Captain, and thank you, Chiefs, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And if you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll also have the information for the Emergency Volunteer Program in our show notes. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.